The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy.
A man tells this story. My wife and I were walking down the street and saw an officer writing a ticket by a car. I said to him, "So you have nothing better to do?" He says, "I was going to give you a warning, but now you're getting a ticket." My wife said, "What's the matter? You get a bad donut this morning?" The officer walks around the car and says, "Your registration is out." I said, "Oh, is this something they teach you at an authoritarian school?" He writes another ticket. We go back and forth, and he writes ticket after ticket. And then we walk to the corner because our bus was coming to take us back home. Now that we're retired, we like to get out and have a little fun these days. So I'd like to talk about forgiveness tonight. This is in a way kind of tied into the talks we've done on the immeasurable states of cultivating kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And as I believe Rilke said, something along the lines of, do not seek love, only seek to address the barriers of love. That is, to look at what's between you and feeling love. And of course, this topic of forgiveness brings immediately where you feel some barriers to love. So I'd like to talk about how for the forgiveness practice is really an organic unfolding of what it means to be more aware in your life. And how in the practice of forgiveness we tend to overlook a very important step, which is really addressing the wound of where the harm is, where the hurt is. And to explore forgiveness of self, but also forgiveness of others. So I'm just back from the spring retreat, from the week-long retreat, and it's nice to see some of the survivors are here with us. If you have not done a week-long retreat, I couldn't recommend it higher. It is an amazing experience where external stimulation is removed as best we can, and as you sit, the muddy water of the mind, the silt begins to settle, and you start to see more clearly. And this aspect of noticing more becomes quite amazing. We talk quite often of the big circle with a line through it. Above the line is what you're aware of, below the line is what you're not aware of. And when you relax and you pay attention, the line moves, and you begin to see things you hadn't seen before. And you begin to see two things. It's a very interesting element, this practice of paying attention on purpose. Is you start to begin to see more clearly what is happening while it's happening. To actually be awake to the sounds that are actually happening right now. The breath as you're feeling it right now, the aliveness of sensation, the movement of thought, and the whole stream of your experience, that capacity to see it clearly for what it is. But you also start to see your relationship to what's happening. You get to see the subtle ways or not so subtle ways that you push away your experience, or you move toward and try to hold on to something that you perceive as pleasant. That whole mechanism of your reaction to life begins to become more and more apparent. It's one of the wonderful benefits of practice, and it's so subtle, it's so intangible, but it's all about stimulus response. Something happens and you react. And what we're finding through all the science of studying the brain and exploring what happens is that when that gap between stimulus and response opens up just a little bit, there's more systemic relaxation. There's more responding to life rather than reacting. There's more creativity. There's more intelligence. There's more emotional intelligence. There's more intuition. All of that flows out of this practice. That's the good news. The bad news, which is also good news, is that everything undigested in your life also comes to the surface. So quite often, over the course of this month, with 100+ people meditating, there were strong memories coming up of old feelings that hadn't fully been felt. Old grudges that just hadn't been fully felt. They're like dreams and desires that sort of got put to the side, and then the sense of sadness or loss. All of that becomes part of the cauldron of who we are getting more and more clear. It's a fascinating thing. We've talked quite often about this power of investigation, that when you experience something really unpleasant, one element of your practice is to notice it and let it go and come back to the here and now, come back to the anchor. But as we've explored, when there's something really strong, a strong physical sensation or a strong emotion or a strong mental state, that in this practice of vipassana or insight meditation, you can turn to that, that energy or that demon, if you will. You can have tea with it. You can recognize it, sense what it's like to really allow it, and then really examine what that feels like inside, and sense if you can meet what you find with some kindness or compassion. And quite often, there is tremendous healing that can occur. So in the practice, we're not looking for things to work on. They kind of find us. So quite often there's a question of like, well, when I'm meditating and I encounter something unpleasant, should I be working on it? Should I be like allowing it, investigating it? Not necessarily. But we simply calm ourselves and we bring ourselves fully present. And then, as we're receiving the moment, when something strongly unpleasant arises, you explore how to be with it. And inevitably, there are regrets, undigested emotions that arise. And this practice of exploring forgiveness for self and other becomes a very powerful tool for letting go. So as I mentioned in the announcements, we have this event on Wednesday, which is loving life through a plant-based diet. And this is an area where I've had a fair bit of passion. I've been really interested in diet and consciousness. And as I've been thinking about this event coming up, I'm moderating it. I had a very strong memory come up that was pretty painful for me. And I kind of like to share a little bit about it. I grew up on a farm, and I was used to being, if you're a farm kid, you're really used to death. One of my earliest memories was my job with the dead lambs, was to bring them up on top of the hill and leave them out for the vultures. And I never thought anything about it. Just kind of what happens. My father was a dedicated carnivore, And all of our meals, like many standard American meals, were based around meat. We bought all our meat from our neighbors. So we'd buy a cow from Mr. Dietrich, and we'd buy a pig from over here, and all that good stuff. And my father was a product of the Depression, and he loved food, and like having good food was really important for him. We raised sheep on our farm, so the joke around the dinner table was, "Please pass Mary." But I'd worked on local dairy farms and so forth. And when I went to college, I wanted to kind of revive my meditation practice, but I also thought, I really didn't like living in the city. I thought if I could find a farm where I could sort of get back to my roots and meditate, wow, that'd be great. And by chance, I met someone who was a graduate of my college, whose father had died. He had taken over the farm, and he was very into meditation. So I lived there for many, many years. And because it was so hard to run a farm in the Midwest and make money, we decided, because they had cows, and they kind of moved out the cows to raise pigs. So we converted a dairy barn to the most humane way of raising pigs. Instead of crates, there were collars that the sows wore. And so I was in charge of the livestock. And I should mention that we were vegetarian at that time. But this is the only way you could make a farm work. And I got very excited about how to make it work. So we'd have 125 piglets every 4 months. And it was really kind of fun to take care of them. I'd clip their eye teeth and spray their umbilical cords with iodine, and when the sows would get too tired, we'd give them a shot of oxytocin, and quite a few times I'd soap up my arm and lie down next to it and reach in there and feel around for little pig noses and pull them out. There was something wonderful about tending to these animals, which I did. And you raise out a pig to about 240 pounds, and then it was time to take them to market. And that's when the reality hit me. These animals that I had taken care of, filling up a big truck, and then backing up the truck to the slaughterhouse, and then suddenly seeing the terror of the animals, and then how they were treated by the staff there, and then hearing the horrible screams from inside the slaughterhouse. It was traumatizing to hear that. And it was very hard for me to keep doing that. And I did for a while. So the regret of the suffering that I took part in felt very, very real for me in those moments of being able to sit with it. And I think that all of us have experienced in our lives that we regret, where we feel some sense of really wishing we hadn't done it. There are a couple things about exploring the practice of forgiveness, and we'll try on a formula for it. And one thing is that quite often where there is an intention to forgive ourselves or forgive others, there's some form of violence. And it might be, there are different ways that violence can occur. There's violence through actions, there's violence through speech, and there's violence through thought. And sometimes the trauma level is too high to forgive. Just as in meditation, you're not muscling through this. And especially when it comes to exploring forgiveness, it's not something you can push through. So when you have an experience that sets you off in some traumatic way, that is to say, where you feel fear and you feel helpless, and the sense that you can't find anywhere kind of safe inside, where you're flooded, this is not the right practice to do. It's not time. It's not anything you can push through. When we harm others, there is some form of very deep ignorance at play. That part of that ignorance is simply an inability to imagine the other person's experience, a process of dehumanizing, of turning the other into an enemy. And we see this when there's the indoctrination of troops, in the army, where you're trained to dehumanize the other person, which can allow you to kill them or to do harm. And of course, we see it now in our culture, this rallying of people around the enemy. So it's not a fast or easy process. It's really this. It's the willingness to feel the hurt of the original wound and then to make room for it. So when I explored how can I hold this memory of deep regret in my own practice, I noticed that when I explored trying to find some way to hold it in loving presence with empathy or kindness or compassion, it was really difficult. I couldn't find the kind of the self-forgiveness too easily in there. There was really this sense of, I did this. I personally took part in this suffering that I created for these other living beings. I had a personal relationship with the mothers that I took care of and the piglets, and at the end, I found myself unable to continue. I just couldn't do it. And what kind of pushed me over the edge was we raised corn and soybeans and oats, and rather than turning them into feed ourselves, we would sort of sell them to the local grain elevator, and then we'd buy feed that was pre-prepared for us. So after a couple of years I did this job, I just happened to look at the back of these feed bags, and I looked at the ingredients, and one of the top ingredients was antibiotics. And I realized, oh my gosh, these animals they're eating antibiotics as a regular part of their diet. What am I taking part in? So, to begin to unhook, I drew on some really beautiful phrases, and then we'll kind of try this on together a little bit. And there are a number of phrases. I know many of us have explored these before, but here are the phrases. I allow myself to be imperfect. I allow myself to make mistakes. I allow myself to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive myself. If I cannot forgive myself now, may I forgive myself sometime in the future. So that became a touchstone for me, of recognizing that if I really gave myself permission to be a learner and still learning my life's lessons, it created a little bit more space for me to stay open to that experience. And again, forgiveness is not a fast process. It's not something you just snap your fingers and all is done, all is taken care of. But it's something you come back to again and again with kind of a fresh intention to really be with what is there. And for me, the pivotal moment where I really felt that kind of the wrench of the real suffering was that moment at the slaughterhouse of hearing the cries of the animals, and kind of the deadened look on the people working there, of just thinking how much they must have deadened themselves to do that job. So I'd like to lead a little reflection on this part of the process, and again, for the sake of just trying this on, I'll lead a little reflection on something I'd like to investigate. I'd like to recommend that you select something on a scale of 1 to 10, more like a 3 or 4, not to go for where your deepest soul regrets are, and just to sense what it's like to have these phrases as a touchstone. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And take some time now as you just connect with the breath. You might soften your belly. And take some time to reflect on some time when you may have done something you regret. And this may be through something you've done through physical action. It may have been through speech, unwise speech. Or it may be simply through harboring negative thoughts. So we'll take some time to reflect on one particular instance you'd like to explore. And as you begin to settle now on a particular issue, you might draw it a little bit closer. Maybe if it's visual, if you can recreate it as a still image or a moving image. If there are words or sounds. And most importantly now, to sense on the inside, what does it feel like when you think about the regret or the hurt? Can you locate that? And in your own way, you might let this know that you see it. You might let it know that you care about this suffering in your own way. And as you sense the experience of what it's like inside, just reflecting on the following words. I allow myself to be imperfect. I allow myself to make mistakes. I allow myself to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive myself. If I cannot forgive myself now, may I forgive myself sometime in the future. And you might sense, if you could forgive yourself, what would that feel like? What would that be like inside? And you might just sense the possibility of forgiving yourself. And you might now deepen your breath. And if you like, you can let your eyes open. And this willingness to feel the hurt and to reflect on the possibility of giving ourselves some space can open up some new possibilities. And over the course of the retreat, it was very helpful for me. It helped to kind of ease the pain of holding that regret that I've been holding for so many years. And then the question is how to be in relationship with that. And through the course of my life, I went kind of back to trying meat again for health reasons, and then being what I called a vegan, eating eggs for many years, and then tried to let that go. But the most important thing is that the letting go of the self-loathing that we tend to hold. We tend to hold ourselves in some form of mild or extreme contempt around our past. And in the letting go, there's new possibilities. So learning how to forgive yourself, to make room for new possibilities, is just one step in the process. When we're in relationship with each other is when it gets really complicated. And so exploring forgiveness is also about exploring forgiving others for their activities, for ways we may have harmed others, as well as ways that you may have been harmed. And the principles are the same. But then the question is, what are the consequences of not forgiving in your life? If you hold on to grudges and resentments, what's that like? There's a classic phrase that says that resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it kills your enemies. The other analogy used by the Buddha is that resentment is like throwing a hot coal at someone and not realizing that you're the one who's being burned. So this question of forgiveness is huge. I'm aware we've not that much time left. But what I find fascinating, and I mentioned this in a talk on retreat, is how forgiveness can be transformed into amazing power. When I think of Mahatma Gandhi, who was thrown off a train because of the color of his skin, sitting by the train tracks in an absolute rage, how did he convert that into the Satyagraha movement that changed an entire culture and affected our planetary consciousness? He said, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is an attribute of the strong. Whew. Martin Luther King, whose house was firebombed, he was ready to give it all up, terrified for his family, for himself. And in the face of that hatred, found a way to keep going. Nelson Mandela, who made a vow that he would love his torturers. He said, as I walked out of the door toward my freedom, I knew that if I did not leave all the anger, hatred, and bitterness behind, that I would still be in prison. He went on to say, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So, the question is, how can you free yourself from the prison of resentments that you may hold about your life? And that's where this formula of forgiveness can be so helpful. So we'll do a little extended meditation on forgiveness. But before we do, just a few comments. And again, when you practice forgiveness, it's very much like we explore the cultivation of kindness and compassion. It's helpful to start where it's easy. It's kind of like having training wheels. Start with small things, and then you can get a sense of how the formula works, where you can expand the circles in your practice. Our inability to forgive quite often is connected to our inability to role reverse, our inability to feel or imagine what another person is feeling. There's no better analogy than the one that is repeated in these circles somewhat ad nauseum, where you're walking through a park, you see a puppy, you go over to pet the puppy, cute little puppy, it lunges at you and you jump back. Suddenly the puppy's the enemy. And then you see that the puppy's leg is caught in a trap. And suddenly you respond to the suffering of the puppy. So it's recognizing the suffering of the other that was the cause of their actions. And even in seeing, as I reflected back over my experience at the slaughterhouse, of seeing these guys just very casually with their tasers, zapping the animals to keep them moving, very easy to feel ill will toward these guys. And then to reflect that for many of these people, there are no other jobs available. Quite often, those who come to this country as immigrants, there's no other work except for the very, very lowest rung, which quite often is working in slaughterhouses, because no one else wants to do it. And knowing that these people are sacrificing for their children to create a better life. Again, when I reflect on their experience, the hatred begins to melt. There's still sadness. There's still a sense of grief, but the hatred isn't there. So taking time to reflect on the experience of the other can be a key to begin to softening your heart. So there's the classic phrases that are used in this practice. And then the sort of updated the 2.0 version, which I prefer. And just to share the kind of the classical phrases, because there are a couple things in there that I find really, really helpful. The classic phrases are first to ask forgiveness for yourself. And it's always interesting in the forgiveness practice that for myself, when I first learned these many, many years ago, and I was reflecting on someone who had been pretty nasty toward me, when I heard, well, first you ask forgiveness for yourself, I thought, what? I'm the victim here. But again, there are three ways that we do violence on others. One is through actions, the grossest level. One is through speech, and the other is through our thoughts. I thought, well, have I done physical actions against this person? Not so much. Have I done violence to this person through speech? Absolutely. Talk to anyone I could find to listen about what a cad this person was. Did I harbor ill will through my thoughts? Absolutely. A fixation, of negativity toward this person. So getting like, wow, I have done violence to this person. I need to take responsibility. And for that was the beginning of the possibility of forgiveness. So the classic phrases go like this. Please forgive me for any way I may have harmed you, consciously or unconsciously, through my thoughts, my speech, or my actions. One of the key phrases here is consciously or unconsciously. Sometimes we consciously want to harm another. We want them to know we disapprove of them. Sometimes it's unconscious. The second I forgive you for any way you may have harmed me, consciously or unconsciously, through your thoughts, your speech, or your action. And when I tried this phrase on with someone who had tormented me in my past, the lights came on, and I realized this person wasn't consciously trying to harm me. They were someone they were a bully and totally out of their ignorance, but they weren't necessarily consciously trying to harm me. That was a powerful insight that began to help me to find some space where I was locked into pretty solid resentment. So these are 3 basic sections. And if you like, you can close your eyes. And it's always helpful to take a little bit of time to really get as specific as you can around reflecting on someone you've had some conflict with. You might like to explore finding a little bit of space in relationship with this person. So it's absolutely fine to think of something where maybe it's just an irritation. So it's not too traumatizing, but it's got enough juice to it that it's meaningful for you. So take a few minutes and reflect on someone or something you'd like to explore for the next few minutes. And now bringing this into mind. Again, visually, if you can make it a little bit more alive in the visual realm, can you find a visual representation of this relationship? As you reflect on it, are there sounds or words that you can recall? And now beginning to sense, as you think about this relationship at its worst, what does it feel like inside? If you were honest around the pain, can you locate it? Is there an emotional word or two that describes how you feel when you think about the challenge of this? And now reflecting on the following phrases. First is a reflection toward yourself. I allow myself to be imperfect. I allow myself to make mistakes. I allow myself to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive myself. If I cannot forgive myself now, may I forgive myself sometime in the future. Sensing the possibility that you might forgive yourself. The next section is asking forgiveness from the other for the harm that you've done to them. Please allow me to be imperfect. Please allow me to make mistakes. Please allow me to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. Please forgive me. If you cannot forgive me now, please try to forgive me sometime in the future. and imagining if this person could forgive you, what that would feel like, what that would be like inside. And finally, now extending forgiveness to the other who has harmed you. Just as I allow myself to be imperfect, so I allow you to be imperfect. I allow you also to make mistakes. I allow you to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive you. If I cannot forgive you now, may I forgive you sometime in the future. Sensing the possibility, if you could forgive the other, now or in the future, what would that feel like? What would that be like inside? And we'll take the next minute in silence. In our final minutes this evening, you might take a moment to wish yourself well in your journey. Imagine your life filled with a greater sense of ease and well-being. Your life guided by deepening wisdom and compassion. And imagining now that your heart was like a star in the night sky, radiating in all directions to all beings. May all beings feel safe and feel guided. May all feel free. And as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. If you didn't like tonight's talk, please forgive me. If not now, sometime in the future. I'd appreciate that. I'll be back next week. We're going to explore the art of letting go, which is a really cool topic. So enjoy your evening. Thank you.